Techlandia is recorded at the Central Office on the East Side in Portland. Central Office is a one-stop for all your office or meeting needs. Check them out at centraloffice.com. Welcome to Techlandia, a podcast about and for the technology industry, a place to learn, connect, and engage with leaders and thinkers involved in the technology industry. You can check us out at techoregon.org, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Techlandia podcast series with Tao. My name's Skip Newberry, President and CEO, and we're really pleased to have with us Olivia Diett, who is the CEO and founder of a New Zealand-based startup called Empathix that is looking at a North American expansion. Olivia, welcome to today's episode.
Thanks, Skip, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I thought it'd be good to start with a little bit of background, both about you and the company for our audience. So I wanted to start by just asking if you could take a little bit of time to describe your personal professional journey.
Yeah, sure. It's a really interesting journey. I get asked this a lot. It's kind of long-winded, so please interrupt if it
We
gets a
got
bit
time.
too long. Great. I'll start at the beginning. So in the beginning, I was kind of born into a family full of entrepreneurs, and I've always had a really big tech focus. But at the same time, I'm really sensitive and really love people, and really throughout my life have always tried to figure out like why people do things the way that they do. And as I grew up, I got a scholarship, which was really cool, into a private school where I got to learn more about like entrepreneurship, technology, but also people. I decided to finish school and go to university, where I studied psychology and business. And the reason that I did that was because I understood that businesses powered societal growth, and I was really interested in how people made that work. And on the side, always was using technology. So from a really young age, I remember we got our first kind of MS-DOS computer, and my dad actually would leave me notes on that computer, and I would reply. So we were enabling kind of a email communication without us knowing that at the time. This was before email was around, which is showing my age a little bit. And then what happened from there is I spent the last 15 years in recruitment and HR. Always looking for technological solutions. In my last role, I was employed by New Zealand's largest employer as the Director of Transformation there, where I had the great opportunity to see kind of end-to-end employment lifecycle and the sticking points that happened in that cycle, with particular interest to me around recruitment. I left that role 5 years ago and went consulting. I knew I never wanted to start my own consultancy, and I've always been interested in tech products. And I thought with my experience in doing that I could, from a consulting perspective, see more and more opportunity to solve the recruitment problem. And the reason for that is it's not all broken, but the recruitment process is 150 years old. Organizations, particularly when they scale, really struggle with that. And if we get hiring wrong, it's not only detrimental for the organization, but also for people as well. And my perspective on that too is that recruitment's one of the most strategic roles you can have in an organization, but often undervalued and hasn't had in the past really good technology to be able to support it. And so what you start to see is quite high turnover in recruitment, as well as people kind of diversify into HR. And so within that as well, I had my first child when I was 21 and still at university. And I think that maybe speaks to the fact that I've started Empathix now. So that's the tech startup that we have. It's a year old. So I consulted for 5 years and then applied to a startup accelerator with the idea for Empathix, which blends advanced technology with traditional processes to ultimately innovate the space and disrupt it. We did kind of the precursor to that, and then got invested in and did the accelerator via StartMate last year, and have been growing since then. We've had really strong traction in New Zealand, which is really great, particularly in the high volume and retail spaces. And we are doing discovery in the US at the moment. And I can talk later about the interest in North America, particularly Oregon as well. But yeah, that's a bit about me and a bit about the story of Empathix and where we are now.
That sounds great. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about why retail in terms of your initial starting point in terms of a foray into the market, as it were. Like what kind of jumped out at you there in terms of a problem set that you felt like, oh, this is low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, this is really interesting because honestly, so my background is in retail, I never predicted that the product would be fit for retail. And I think this speaks to how entirely customer led we are. So in the beginning, we thought we had a solution which looks totally different to kind of what we've built now. And that's a combination of like market conditions, but also what customers want. So what we realized really, really quickly was that there is no industry or no organization that we've spoken to, and we've spoken to more than 300 in this space, that measures cost of recruitment and cost of hire like a retailer. That combined with the pressure on retailers, obviously with the higher volumes, but also with the costs that are required in order to survive this market, means that there's a really heavy focus on that kind of recruitment pipeline. But on top of that, because of the general economy and people sadly losing their roles, there's a lot of candidates in the market. Combine that with the, I think, technological evolution point that we're at now with AI. And there are platforms that, for example, will pull every single retail role across the world into a single platform, and one person submits their one CV, and that CV goes off to those, say, millions of jobs. And what that means for recruiters is that they get much higher volumes than ever before, and hiring managers as well. They get much higher volumes than ever before. And so there's a lot of pressure to come up with a solution for how to manage those volumes, give a really good candidate experience, and enhance employer brand. And so we released a human-centric CV sifter, so one part of our tool, actually earlier than anticipated because of this problem and the pull in the space. And what we've found in going deep in the space is actually we are able to save organizations around 90% of time and cost associated. So that's why it's been so popular, particularly here, although we do have companies as well that are working in the US, and we're seeing the same indications in the US as well, which is interesting and exciting.
That's fantastic. And I'm wondering, like there's an element of automation, of course, that you're offering as part of the solution. With the sort of rapid rise in interest from companies and looking at integrating AI, specifically generative AI, into their workflows. I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on what you're seeing trend-wise in terms of adoption there, whether it's retail or even other sectors where you've looked at kind of some different use cases there. And I'm also wondering whether you could comment a little bit on candidates as well who are seeking employment opportunities are also increasingly starting to experiment with AI tools to see if they can figure out how to essentially game automated systems when looking to gain an advantage relative to all the other candidates. And I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on kind of the state of play there in that marketplace.
I love this question so much. So I'm particularly passionate about this space. And yes, I think actually so if we take a step back from retail and then just look at either kind of really strong brand which attracts high volume candidates, or any type of high volume. And high volume has a different definition depending on the kind of labor resource that the business has. So we see four things. I'll take you back to CVs and kind of the recruitment process. So when I started doing a lot of customer discovery, I made 3 key assumptions. Those were, 1, people really hate CVs and want to get away from them. 2 is people don't like to be charged essentially similar to a real estate model where you kind of pay for a candidate once they're placed from an agency perspective. And then 3 is the process is just really hard and painful, and we're looking for a way to be completely innovative and shake things up and kind of turn it on its head. But those 3 assumptions is what people say, but are actually entirely incorrect. And the reason that they're incorrect is, 1, the recruitment process, particularly if we're looking at the vacancy to interview timeline, is 150 years old. So we've been using CVs for 150 years in order to get jobs, and people love anchoring to them. The second thing is that people also love to pay for people in recruitment processes when they have the right person. And so from an agency perspective, that's really interesting. The model makes sense. The market asks for that. From a kind of SaaS automation perspective, that's really interesting as well, because effectively the organization or the business has decided to bring that model internally, pay a salary for that person. And so you're effectively paying for the people that you're recruiting. So that model, is interesting in itself. And then the last part being is the innovation. And so I definitely believe that there needs to be innovation, but I also think that we're working in a really traditional space, that if you map technology back to the early 90s, we literally just took that kind of job board model, put it online. That exists today still, with some variation. So if you take LinkedIn, social or professional networking is probably the kind of second biggest disruptor to that. And then there's been kind of a lot of other solutions that have been tried, and it's a really big market. It's really competitive with a lot of different solutions, and a lot haven't worked. So when we come to thinking about like automation, but also innovation and kind of what will ultimately disrupt this, I do think advanced technology will do that. But I also think that with our solution, for example, what we see, actually, no, stepping aside from our solution, in response to that, people want to get to candidates faster. And ultimately, that is CVs or some other report that shows, yes, this person is a fit for my organization. And there are 3 different ways that organizations will choose to do that. So 1 is outsourcing those decision-making processes to AI. So there are tools that provide the values-based questions that are AI-generated, which candidates should answer. Second is one-way video interviewing. Third, we've seen a lot of kind of Google Forms go out if a company can't afford to do the former 2, to be able to kind of narrow down the CVs. Where that, or the function of that behavior is just to get to the point that organizations can assess a lower amount of CVs to try and find the right person. But actually, it adds another step. And with the technology we have at the moment, we have a real opportunity to say, why can't you just get to the CV that you need the first time? And you could look to incorporate some other tooling if necessary to get a holistic view. But actually, the tooling that we have available, because of the technology we had available, adds a step and doesn't necessarily solve a fundamental problem. To your next question, which was around how candidates can gamify that, I think it's really interesting. So from an organization's perspective, we're trying to find ways of going, how do we get to the CV that we want? And then from a candidate's perspective, we're going, how do we make sure that I'm the CV the organization wants, or the person the organization wants? And so then with tools like ChatGPT and things, we can fill out a Google form really easily after analyzing the job description and the job ad and the values of the employer to try and match that. We can do the same when we're going through the AI chatbot, just to make sure that our answers are are really aligned and kind of perfect within the organization, because remember, we're not relying on CVs or experience, we're just relying on what people are saying. And similarly, the video one-way platforms as well. These are interesting. I think the video kind of interaction we'll see more of, and I'm interested in that space. But I do think I have seen, and I don't know if you have as well, but AI avatars that are kind of dynamic and run those interview processes. But what I've also seen are candidate avatars. And I think if we head down this path, what we will end up seeing is our avatars kind of talking to each other, because there's an element of desperation from a business to get the talent that they need, but there's more at the moment desperation from candidates to get to the job that they want, and people will do anything to find a way around that. And so we take the opposite approach and say, how do we automate this process using advanced technology to get you the right candidates the first time that are both skills and values aligned, which makes sure that candidates aren't gamifying the process, so it's authentic and genuine. And with technology, we're increasing human connection, because I think we're at an interesting point in the market right now where we have a surplus of candidates, but in the future that won't be the case. The market will spring back around, and employer brand is really important. And so everything that we do is about enhancing that employer brand, so that whilst you might have a lot of candidates now, if that's not the case in kind of 5 or 10 years time, you'll have a really strong brand and market from an employer perspective for talent attraction.
So do you think there's going to be a need for sort of a human in the loop, and using AI in a way where it quickly gets folks to a human expert, whether it's providing some key level of advice related to, say, tax or accounting or legal, or in the hiring process, right? How do I quickly get to the interview process where it's much more human to human kind of interaction going on there? Do you see that's where things are going to be for a while, or do you see, X number of years from now, it's going to be fully automated? Because I think it's interesting you pointed out that people on the client side are saying, hey, we just want to, or on the candidate side, we just want to, try and get to the interview as quickly as possible. And on the employer side, they're like, we just want to get to the interview process with the right candidates as soon as possible. Where do you see things headed there?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think that that's totally industry dependent. So, for example, there is a world in particularly the retail space that I can see, particularly in the US, where you're able to hire 24/7 from a platform. But in other spaces where, like you say, legal and compliance, where it's really uh, often those retention rates are lower. It's really quite technical. You want to make sure that the level of like cultural fit from an organizational perspective is there. I'm not saying that that's actually not what retailers are looking for, but I am saying that the volume of staff and the turnover in the retail sector is so much more that actually there is an opportunity to be able to really expedite that process. But I also think that ultimately recruiters have a really strategic function in an organization. And I think what we'll begin to see is typically where we would have employed people to CV screen or to manage the more administrative parts of the recruitment lifecycle. We'll be seeing hiring managers having more insight into that with technology, and lean on their recruiters from a more strategic perspective. So talking about things like quality, employer brand, diversity of employment as well. So what are those metrics looking like, so that recruiters have a voice as well at the kind of exec table to say, actually, this is what our hiring trends look like. This is where we need to be going, and this is where we need to invest. And recruiters typically haven't had access to that data before easily. So that's a really exciting thing. Whether or not I think it will be completely automated with no human involvement to get to interview it, yes, I think it's certainly possible. And I think the key part is whether or not that's wanted from organizations. But in the future, yes, I think that there is a big opportunity for an ecosystem that is self-fulfilling and really kind of growth and values aligned. But I think that we are fundamentally human, and we will always work with people. And so when it comes to interviews and working together, I think that that's a very important human element that actually would be difficult to replicate. Um, I think people are doing that at the moment, and that's totally up to them. I'm just not convinced myself that that's kind of the future that we want to build for each other in the world.
Right. And I'm wondering too, as you continue to achieve greater amounts of scale with your platform, if you could talk a little bit about some of where you see opportunities from a data and analytics standpoint for the customers you're serving, right? Because I can imagine over
Yeah.
time, as they have more insight into what's working and not with their hiring process through your platform, they're going to be able to make course corrections that have potentially significant benefits to the employer.
Yeah, exactly. I think so typically at the moment what we see measured as time to hire, but that kind of encompasses the time from a job that's open to when another person is hired, but doesn't break down the steps in between that. Doesn't really look at like the type or the demographic that's hired, so the types of people that we're looking at, or how to source those people directly. So what we're seeing as well, from our perspective, is saying, okay, well, from a vacancy to interview timeline perspective, how much time would you have typically spent on these activities? And within our tool, you can see how long these activities take now, which is so typically the process is about 20 hours per role, depending on that role, but on average. And now recruiters and hiring managers can achieve that in 15 minutes. And then we look at, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of getting from opening job to hiring? And what we're seeing is, for example, where an opening time may have been 30 days, now that's looking like 5 days. And so we're seeing how much we can reduce those timelines as well. Where they're longer, because they're always outliers, we're then able to say, okay, well, what's going on for that person that means that this process is not as quick as what we're seeing in other areas. And what that means from an organizational perspective is that if there's pressure on other areas of the organization that are not recruitment focused, that leaders, particularly HR people as well, can go and optimize those processes and support their leaders to be more efficient and effective as well. So there's a lot of productivity gains that can be seen from that. From a diversity perspective, our tool is completely unbiased. We've done that really purposefully and thoughtfully. There's a lot of bias in the recruitment process. A lot of that tends to lean toward how much one person likes another, but that may not be the best for an organization. We know from research that organizations are much more likely to be profitable. I forget the exact metrics, or what the multiplier is, but much more likely to be profitable with diverse teams than if they're not. And so that's a key thing that we measure as well. Are we hiring too many Olivias? Why might that be? Is it our messaging? And we pull insights from that as well. Also from an industry perspective, so what are the things from an organizational perspective that we look for from a skills perspective that we know work really, really well here? So you can start nurturing those talent pipelines with the ultimate vision being to not only hire really, really fast, but ultimately unlock that passive talent, because you'll be much more targeted in being able to build networks specifically around the people that you're targeting, who might not apply for jobs, but would move if approached.
And shifting a little bit to the focus on North America. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your thinking behind expansion into North America and any observations relative to Oregon in particular.
Yes. So fortuitous for us, I think. And I say this like with a smile on my face because I was introduced to you, Skip, via someone else in New Zealand, which I thought was really, really cool. And you and I had a discussion. And to be honest, when I first uh, was looking at the US, I hadn't considered Oregon before, but the more that I've learned about it, the more I've been interested in it from a tech perspective, because I think you've got a really thriving community that so many people have been super helpful. I have connected with a lot of people now from like a discovery perspective, learned about the brands that are headquartered or have presence in Oregon. It is not far away from other tech hubs like Silicon Valley, so that's interesting to us as well. I think from like a launch pad perspective, it feels really supportive, and that's also really important because at the end of the day, we need to find a place that has a really kind of strong backing, not only from a customer perspective, but also from a kind of go-to-market landing perspective for Empathix as well. And everything that we've experienced so far indicates that for us in Oregon, which is really cool. And I'm excited to explore some more. I'm planning hopefully to come there early next year. And at the moment, we're doing discovery in the US, which is really, really cool. So some of the brands that we're talking to are really exciting, particularly in Oregon as well. So I'm excited to keep exploring the space.
That's great. It's back in 2016 or so. I remember I wrote an article for the local business journal with the subject titled "Kiwi Invasion,"
Cool.
and we had about 6 companies or so in the area, in the greater Portland area, that were from New Zealand and had set up either a North American headquarters or their entire headquarters here. And since the pandemic, that put a little bit of a pause on some of the Kiwi invasion, as it were. But I'm
Mm.
excited to kind of get the flywheel going again, and we're definitely starting to see some more sort of expansion or interest opportunities. And coming from New Zealand, which is a very small but innovative country, and startups really need to be export oriented from the get go. And I'm wondering if you can comment on kind of how that informed your approach to growth and expansion and looking at the North American market.
Yes, New Zealand is a small island at the bottom of the world, but incredibly innovative. And I think one of the reasons is because we are raised with that global mindset. I think for me as well, coming from kind of side of my family that is not from New Zealand as well, really strong connections to the rest of the world. And so when I started building Empathix, I always had a global vision for the product, not only from like an export perspective, but also from kind of an impact and um, uh, reinvigoration or reinventing perspective in the recruitment space. And so that's why, I mean, we're a relatively young company of just over a year old, and from the beginning have always had a path to say, okay, we'll validate the problem in New Zealand and Australia, and then look to do some discovery work in the US, set a really strong go to market strategy around those problems if they exist in the same or similar way, and then grow from there. But I think it's really important, not for all Kiwi businesses, but certainly in the tech space, to have sights on larger markets, but also a global vision that can really really change an entire industry, which is what we are looking to do.
That's great. And no, we try to, kind of market Oregon as an ideal landing pad for startups from countries like New Zealand, where they're looking to break into the North American market. We're a relatively capital efficient ecosystem here, to your point that you made earlier, pretty well connected, welcoming, a vibrant startup ecosystem. And also, rainy weather a good part of the year. So there's that sort of familiarity with New Zealand. but also like, to your point, we're close to major markets and other tech hubs like Silicon Valley, Seattle to the north. So yeah, it's Oregon's a nice little landing pad in that respect. But I'm wondering if as we start to wrap up, any sort of parting thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with.
Oh, well, if you are looking at recruitment solutions, I would ask that you kind of ask those like critical questions around why you might be looking at solutions that feel like they get you to maybe a faster place in terms of getting you to the people or the CVs, and where there might be technology that can just do that in the first place. I think as well, if you do have high volume CVs, feel free to connect with me via LinkedIn. I'd be really keen to explore what the problem spaces that you're experiencing and learn. So that would be really, really cool as well. Also, thank you for listening. I've really appreciated my time, and thank you, Skip, for talking with me about this. It's a super big passion of mine, and I'm really, really excited about exploring more of Oregon.
Well, we appreciate your taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us, and excited for what you're building. And we look forward to hosting you here during your visit in early 2025.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Skip. That's great.
Thank you.